As we are talking about long-lasting peace in Ukraine, Russians have sent the largest drone attack we've seen ever during the past 3 years. 267 drones immediately sent at various targets throughout the country. Just last weekend, Russians have sent a drone at a fourth reactor, at the shelter of the fourth reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And they have damaged that shelter, which contains so much nuclear waste under there. What kind of country are we dealing with? We're dealing with a dictator who is on the mission to destroy Ukraine.
And so does peace seem more elusive to you now, 3 years on since that full-scale invasion, Ambassador? Does it seem like peace is further away?
3 years ago, I had a feeling that the war would be over by the end of 2022. But 3 years on, we still see war ongoing. And we have to understand what the root causes of this war are. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia wants to rewrite history. There is a fantasy out there in Vladimir Putin's mind about revival of his empire. And we cannot reward the aggression. We cannot reward Russia for what they've done, and they need to be responsible. They need to be held responsible for killing 38 Australians on board of MH17, including other innocent people who were on that flight, killing many Ukrainians, destroying cities, committing those war crimes, committing crimes against humanity. Because if aggression is not punished, it will inspire other authoritarian leaders to do the same thing.
Are you concerned that Russia is not going to be punished by the US, given the language we've heard in recent weeks from the US president suggests that the US perhaps is edging closer to a stronger relationship with Russia?
It's still early to judge at this stage. We believe that security of Europe depends on a solid transatlantic relationship. European security is underpinned by the US commitment to Europe. And it goes beyond just Europe, because security in Europe has a direct impact on the security in the Indo-Pacific. We see how it all intertwined. In addition, Russia is a Pacific country. We see the deployment of North Korean troops in Ukraine, and we see how everybody is getting affected. And we are risking to get into the dangerous world where a might is right. And we know how it's going to affect Australia. Australian interests are at stake, Australian security is at stake, as much as is at stake European security. And for a long-lasting, durable and robust peace, we must take into account that aggression cannot be rewarded. And therefore, we will continue working with the US and Europe on dealing with Russia, because I think it's through strength that we can get peace. But that strength has to come to Ukraine. And this is how Russians understand it, and this is when they will come to a table to negotiate.
Would Ukraine be able to continue your fierce defence of your territory without the level of financial support you've seen from the US in previous years? Would you be able to do that with an alliance of European countries and other supporters like Australia?
Ukrainians are strong people. We have survived many years of the Russian colonialism. We have survived the genocide in the 20th century, which killed more than 4 million people. We survived the Second World War. Ukraine lost more people in the Second World War than the UK, France, and the US combined. And for the past 3 years, we have demonstrated our fierce resistance to the Russian troops. And this is what has inspired the world. This is, of course, we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves without the support of the US, Britain, leadership, as well as all other countries, including Australia. And we will continue fighting because we know what is the alternative. And the alternative is to live under the Russian occupation. And we know how life is there. We know how people are suffering there. Gross violations of human rights, filtration camps, torture chambers, rape. People are just not having their rights. This is forceful identity changes. Hospitals are, libraries are destroyed, museums are looted. This is what's happening under the Russian occupation. So for us, when you look at this alternative, of course we'll keep on fighting.
We've seen quite a sobering statement from the president overnight saying he'd be willing to resign, perhaps in exchange for long-hoped-for NATO membership. Do you think President Zelenskyy should step aside? Does he still have the support of the Ukrainian people?
President Zelensky's popularity in Ukraine is currently at 57%. More so, it has jumped during the last several days. People are united in support of President Zelenskyy. And his suggestion yesterday in response to a question was very straightforward. He is ready to step down if Ukraine becomes a NATO member, because he cares about security of Ukraine long term. It's not only about the next 4 years, it's about what's going to come back. I have to remind you, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 when we were a neutral country. Because of the weak response to that, 8 years later, Russia felt emboldened to come back with a much bigger war. So President Zelenskyy does not care about his own job. He cares about the safety and security of the Ukrainian people. And look, we are fighting for the way of life, just a way of life that all Australians share. Democracy, peace, prosperity. This is what we are fighting for.
I want to ask you about sanctions announced by the Australian government on 70 Russian individuals, 79 entities. What impact can these sanctions have, and would you like to see the government go even further?
We have to rally around Ukraine, and more sanctions which will be imposed on Russia, the better. We have more sanctions on their banking sector, on their nuclear sector, on their IT companies. We should be able to use seized sovereign assets. $300 billion of those assets must be used in support of Ukraine, for procurement of weapons, for Ukraine's rebuild, because Russia needs to be held accountable for what they've done in Ukraine. And I would welcome more assistance from Australia as we move forward.